All right, thanks for repeating that. I'll call the meeting to order, and please call the roll.
Great. Good morning. Mr. Couch?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Chiesa?
Here.
Mr. McCauley, excuse me.
Here.
Mr. Mendez?
Here.
Mr. Rickman?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Ms. Shuklian? Mr. Pereira?
Present. Thank
Great.
you for that.
Thank you.
Item number 3, I'll turn it over to Samir for election of officers.
Thank you, Supervisor. So as a reminder, the study agency is a JPA that's been established for a number of years that is a body for moving forward research in the San Joaquin Valley Partnership, public-private partnership involving a number of agencies and a number of other stakeholders in moving forward this research. With respect to the officer selection, there is a policy that the San Joaquin Valley Study Agency has put into place for establishing the officer roles. Under the policy, there's a rotation, and in following that policy, the rotation would put into place as chairperson Supervisor David Couch from Kern County, and as vice chair Supervisor Robert Rickman from San Joaquin County. And this body does meet on a regular basis, as there is some business to be conducted throughout the year with respect to following up on some of the research projects, taking proposals to the board. And so we'll obviously continue working with this board throughout the year to make sure that there are timely items with respect to the role of this body. So with that, the recommendation is for the study agency board to move forward with those recommendations established under the rotation policy.
All right, I will take a motion to approve the officers.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mendez and a second by Supervisor, was that Chiesa?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right, please call the roll.
All right, and through the chair, Ms. Shuklian has joined the meeting.
Public comment.
Oh, public comment? I apologize. Let's
No,
do public comment. I have no public comment in Fresno. Is there any public comment in Modesto or in Bakersfield? There is no
Public comment in Bakersfield. Sorry,
Modesto.
there's no
No
public
worries.
comment in Modesto.
Great, thank you. And there's no public comment online. So I will call the roll right now. Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. Chiesa?
Yes.
Mr. McCauley?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Rickman?
Yes.
Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
Ms. Shuklian?
Yes.
Mr. Pereira?
Yes.
Great, motion passes. Thank you.
Well, it's been an honor to serve you in this capacity, and I will turn the chair over to Mr. Rickman. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Couch.
I'm happy to pass it off to Mr. Rickman if we want to do that.
So the next items on the agenda, Supervisor Couch, would be item number 4, approval of the consent calendar.
All right, let's call public comment. No public comment in Fresno. Do we have any public comment for Modesto or Bakersfield? No.
I think, maybe we can see if there's any
Board member comment?
motions for action on the item.
Good call. I got excited. Thank you.
Can the chair move approval?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay. I'll second.
Okay. No public comment. Calling the chair. I'm sorry, calling roll. Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. Chiesa?
Yes.
Mr. McCauley?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Rickman?
Yes.
Mr. Robinson? Ms. Shuklian?
Aye.
Mr. Pereira?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Any board member comments? Seeing none, is there any other business? If not,
There is
we're
an
adjourned.
item,
Public comment?
there's an item 5 just for, I don't think that there is public comment,
Public
but
comment.
let's just double check on public comment under item number 5.
Any public comment in Modesto or Bakersfield?
No public comment in Bakersfield.
There's no public comment in Modesto.
Great, thank you. And there's no public comment in Fresno or online.
We now adjourned?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Pass it off. Very good job, gentlemen. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this governing board meeting to order. The date is Thursday, January 19th. The time is 9:10. Good morning and welcome to our meeting of the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District Governing Board. We have board members participating in person at our offices in Fresno, Bakersfield, and Modesto. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation via Zoom and webcast. Before we begin, here are some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices such as your cell phone. During the meeting, all public participants will be placed on mute by the host. Public members will not be able to mute or unmute manually. Audio for members of the public will be unmuted once they are recognized to make a public comment. After each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment. The clerk will recognize any public attendees who have indicated they wish to speak. So with that, we are going to move on to the roll call.
Thank you. Mr. Bessinger?
Here.
Mr. Couch?
Here.
Ms. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. McCauley?
Here.
Mr. Mendez?
Here.
Dr. Pacheco Werner?
Here.
Mr. Pereira?
Present.
Mr. Preciado?
Here.
Mr. Rickman?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Dr. Sheriff?
Here.
Ms. Sheklian?
Here.
Mr. Chiesa?
I am here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask item 3 as the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to ask our Vice Chair, Member Lewis, to lead us in the pledge, please. Thank you very much. So if you watched our December meeting, we had a couple of longtime members who had retired, and so that means that we have a couple of new members joining us today. You might have heard some numbers. I just have them introduce themselves. We have to my left, Member McCauley, Supervisor McCauley, who is brand new in the supervisor ranks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity just to say hello to everybody. You know, when you're coming in and you're replacing someone that's been on the with the district for nearly, I think, 10 years, and Supervisor Wheeler, certainly helpful to have great staff, as it seems we do. So thank you, Samir, for all your time on Tuesday from the introduction. Also appreciate, you know, the opportunity to sit next to Supervisor Mendez and Dr. Sheriff's here, ensuring that I will have a varying degree of opinions close by. So thank you again for the opportunity to sit here and learn a little and hopefully provide some input.
Perfect. Welcome very much. And to my right, we have Supervisor Robinson from Kings County.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hit your button.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to represent Kings County. I too, like Supervisor McCauley, have tough shoes to fill. Supervisor Peterson worked long and hard at this and did a good job. But thankfully, thanks to Samir, we had a nice orientation the other day, and I'll do my best to get up to speed quickly. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Very much. I want you to know that I think after about 4 or 5 months, I went to Samir and I was kind of down. I was overwhelmed with all the information that was coming in. And if it wasn't for some of the longtime board members kind of talking me through that and with staff, you know, I might not have stuck this out, so please stick it out.
Look at you now.
Look at me now. This is what happens when you miss a meeting. So don't miss a meeting. Yeah. So I appreciate your willingness to serve. Again, this is it's a pretty heavy duty committee assignment. I consider it, and there is a lot of things. We're taking a lot of business. We have a lot of advocates, and we're trying to balance everything. So just keep that in mind as we go along. Did you want to say something, Samir? No.
I just wanted to say, really excited from staff to work with the new board members here. We have a great board. We have a great track record of doing a lot to fulfill our mission of clean air and improving public health and quality of life for our San Joaquin Valley residents. So just very excited to work with the new supervisors. Already had some great conversations and great engagement, and looking forward to a strong year of fulfilling our mission here. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. All right, on to item 4, which is approval of the consent calendar, which are items 14 through 21. Any board members want to pull any items or comment on any items? Anyone in the public?
Oh, sorry.
Anyone in the public want to comment on any items?
No public comment in Fresno. Do we have any public comment in Bakersfield?
No public comment in Bakersfield.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment in Modesto?
No public comment in Modesto.
Thank you.
I would move for approval of consent calendar.
We have a motion and a second from Dr. Sheriffs.
Sure. Okay, great. Mr. Bessinger,
Aye.
Mr. Couch,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. McCauley,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
Dr. Pacheco Werner,
Yes.
Mr. Pereira,
Aye.
Mr. Preciado,
Aye.
Mr. Rickman,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson, Dr. Sheriff,
Yes.
Ms. Shucklian,
Aye.
Mr. Chiesa.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Perfect. On to item 5, which is a public comment period. It's an opportunity for anyone in the public to speak on matters under the board's jurisdiction that are not on today's posted agenda. It is requested that no comments be made during the period on items that are on the agenda. We'll give you an opportunity when those items are up. The public may make comments on each board agenda item during the time allotted for public comment on those items. Attention is called to the fact that the board is prohibited by law from taking action on matters discussed that are not on today's posted agenda. Do we have any public comment?
We do. We have 2 public comments online. Ms. Connie Young.
Morning, Connie.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Can hear you just fine.
Great. So I'm Connie Young, Fresno resident, retired registered nurse, and volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, also known as CCL. Perhaps you noticed my absence last month. I was in the Bahamas visiting my daughter, who claims that the Bahamas has some of, if not the cleanest air in the world. Talk about freedom. Every day, I and everyone else on the islands could go about our day without checking the air quality index or worrying that we were damaging our hearts, lungs, or brains simply by breathing. I hope that you will continue making every effort to return our air to its pure natural state so that Valley residents may too experience the freedom of having air that is safe to breathe every day. With that in mind, I'd like to thank you for learning about several aspects of climate change during your study retreat in November. Hopefully, you will continue learning about this worldwide phenomenon that has such implications for our air quality. For instance, perhaps you've heard that meteorologists are predicting El Niños, which are likely to raise global temperatures even higher in the next 2 years. It's said that to be forewarned is to be forearmed. How might this information guide your decisions as you plan for our future? I'd also like to provide you with a quick update about Citizens Climate Lobby. As you may recall, our main focus has been putting a price on carbon emissions and returning the proceeds to U.S. households. Now that the climate provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act are in effect, CCL is broadening its focus to encompass 3 new topics: healthy forests, electrification and building efficiency, and clean energy permitting reform. Regarding healthy forests, we will address matters related to forest management and the urban canopy. With electrification and building efficiency, we'll be learning about and sharing information about local, state, and federal laws and regulations that promote those initiatives. We will discuss these two topics, plus clean energy permitting reform with our members of Congress, as well as, of course, carbon fee and dividend. Needless to say, I'll keep you updated as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. I just want you to recognize that I didn't hear, like, for a minute after you said I was in the Bahamas. I was daydreaming. So don't rub it in next time.
All right, Miss Janet Dietz-Gamay.
Good morning, Janet.
Good morning. Good morning, board, chairman, and staff. Major disasters have been striking the United States much more often in recent years as global climate changes. Damage from weeks of storms and flooding in California could exceed $1 billion, according to the state's emergency agency and private weather forecasters. That toll comes on the heels of 2022, one of the worst on record for large-scale weather and climate disasters around the United States, according to data released Tuesday by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It is likely that this is going to be at least several $billion. It will unfortunately, join the club of billion-dollar disasters. The nation was struck last year by 18 disasters that caused more than $1 billion each in damage. That's the third highest number in the 40 years that NOAA has been keeping records. The only other years on record with more billion-dollar disasters are 2020 and 2021. At the top of the 2022 list is Hurricane Ian, which caused $113 billion in damage, the country's third costliest hurricane since 1980, behind Hurricanes Katrina and Harvey. The drought and heat wave in the western and central United States was the second worst disaster in 2022, causing $22 billion in damage. All told, last year's 18 large-scale disasters caused $165 billion in damage, according to NOAA. Here are some other reasons last year's disasters stood out. Hurricane Nicole, which struck Florida on November 10th, was the first November hurricane to make landfall in the United States in almost 40 years. Typhoon Merbok, which damaged homes in Alaska, was the strongest storm to enter the Bering Sea during September in 70 years. Alaska passed the 1 million acre mark for land burned by wildfires on June 18th, the earliest in the past 32 years. Average temperatures in Alaska were 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit higher than normal last year, almost double the temperature increase in the contiguous United States. At least 40% of the landmass of the mainland United States has been in drought for the past 119 weeks, longer than any other time in 22 years of U.S. drought monitoring. More tornadoes were reported in March 2022 than any other March on record, going back to 1950. There were 1,331, 3 times the average for month. Climate change is costly. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet.
Okay. All right, no further public comment online and no public comment in Fresno. Do we have any public comment in Modesto?
No public comment in Modesto.
Thank you. Any public comment in Bakersfield?
No public comment in Bakersfield.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, on to item 6, star recognition. STAR stands for the listening public service, teamwork, attitude, and respect.
Good morning,
Good
everyone.
morning.
Hope you're doing well. I'm glad to be here. Shanika Dixon, Director of Personnel. As you're all aware, and as we've shared, excuse me, recognitions of employees' contributions is an essential component of the district STAR work culture. Today, we would like to recognize and show our appreciation for those employees who have reached a service milestone in the 4th quarter of 2022. So we have individuals who have joined us virtually, as well as some staff that have joined us here today in person. So thank you for your commitment and service to the district over the years. We appreciate your contributions. So first, I'll start off with those individuals who are celebrating 5 years of service. Samuel Palmquist, Senior Air Quality Inspector. James Sanders, Senior Air Quality Inspector. They are in the Modesto office. And in Bakersfield, 5 years of service, Silvana Procopio, Senior Air Quality Engineer. Now coming over to the central office in Fresno, celebrating 5 years of service, John Stagnero, Director of Compliance. Yi Wei, Air Quality Specialist. Evan Christensen, Audio Video Specialist. Reaching 10 years of service, Heather Hanks, Program Manager. Jeff Daniels, Programmer Analyst. 15 years of service, Michelle Franco, Deputy Clerk of the Board. 20 years of service, Robert Harris, Programmer Analyst. And lastly, we have someone who is being recognized for 30 years of service, Tom Jordan. Tom Jordan is our Senior Policy Advisor. Congratulations, everyone. Thank you for your service to the district. We appreciate your contribution.
Mr. Chair, if I could just one quick more staff level comment on this. It's crazy just looking around at the room, the virtual room, and it really feels like yesterday that we hired a lot of these folks, and now it's it's 5 years, 10 years. It also feels like yesterday that I started and sort of learning from members like Tom, who've been here for 30 years and are such a vital part of what we do. We're about our people. Everything that we do here, it starts with the staff, and it's all about public service. And I just really want to commend our team for the longevity here, for the great work that they do, and for and the board for the STAR work culture that has been such a big part of our ability to provide that excellent customer service to all those that we serve. So thanks to the staff and congrats, and I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, for comments.
So how many years has the Air Board been in existence?
This year is our 30th anniversary.
That seems, okay. Point made.
He must have started before we had child labor laws, right?
Is he the last of the Mohegans of the originals?
There's a couple.
Yeah, we have a couple.
Yeah.
Great.
Outstanding. So much appreciation. I love the recognition. This is always, if someone sticks around in a job and the board wants to keep them and they want to be here, it's a true match made in heaven. So appreciate everyone. And Tom, you were the first person I ever met from the Air Board many years ago. So always great to hang out with you. Any other board comments?
Oh, let's raise our hands one more time.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you so much.
Nika, thank you. On to item 7, receive and file the annual comprehensive financial report.
I'd like to introduce Ryan Buchanan, our Director of Administrative Services, who heads the team that is responsible for ensuring your board's high expectations around fiscal transparency and accountability. We have an item on the agenda today to present the recent audits that were completed, and I will turn it over to Ryan to walk us through this item.
Perfect. Thank you, Samir. Good morning, Chair, members of the board. I'm here to report to you with the district's annual comprehensive financial report for the fiscal year 2021-2022. These financial reports are prepared by our financial team each year, and the district is in agreement with Price Page & Company to provide the annual audit, working hard throughout the year to look at our financial reports and report back to your board. This district prepares the annual comprehensive financial report, also known as the ACFR, as well as a single audit report where all federal funded grants are included, and those audits are conducted in accordance with the Single Audit Act of 1984. Price Page has completed the annual report for all district financial statements and concluded that these reports present all material respects with no findings. In other words, a clean audit report for all district financial statements. In addition, Price Page has noted that the district has no instance of non-compliance under governmental accounting standards. And today we have Mr. Fausto Hinojosa and Anthony Gonzalez joining us today from Price Page. Mr. Hinojosa is the managing partner and head of all audits and forensic consulting engagements of the firm. I'd like to thank Mr. Fausto and the wonderful team from Price Page that worked to complete these audits. I'd also like to recognize our finance team that joined us here for the meeting today. So with all due respect, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hinojosa for a brief presentation on the audit. Thank you. Can I do that? You can come sit right here if you like.
Perfect. Do I click this way?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, good morning, Mr. Chair, board members. Appreciate the opportunity to share the results of the audit. This is probably our third, fourth year here with the district. This time around, we were auditors probably 10, 12 years ago for a period of time as well. So glad to serve you. I am going to be brief here. So I can't see that, but I've got the printout here. Oh, I'm sorry. There it is. I am an auditor. So this is the agenda, what I'm going to be sharing here for the next few minutes. Just a little bit about the firm, because some of you are new here to this board. So I want to share kind of a little bit about our background. I want to talk about audit process, some areas of emphasis during this year's audit, the auditor's reports, which you've already had a summary of, some key financial statement items, some communications that we're required to make to a board under the auditing standards, and then finally leave room if there's any questions for us. So very briefly here with the firm, we're here located in Clovis. I am the managing partner. We're founded in 1976. We're one of the larger, well, I think we might be the largest local firm in town, specializing in governmental and nonprofit audits of federal awards. And as I see this board, we work with a number of organizations that you're involved with. So we appreciate that. We're over 50 employees here with over 16 CPAs. I'm the engagement partner, so I have ultimate responsibility. I'm the one that signs the report. And if anything goes wrong, then it might be my house that that somebody comes after. Ozzy is unable to join us. Osvaldo Gutierrez, he was a manager with our firm. Anthony, as we shared, is here with us. So audit process, our job as auditors is to assess the risks of error and fraud. So those are the two things that we're looking for. We're trying to figure out whether there have been any errors that might be material to the financial statements, or if there's been any fraud that's been committed. There was a time when auditors were shying away from saying that they had a responsibility for fraud, but the auditing standards clarified that and made it clear that if an auditor is not actually looking for fraud, then what is an auditor doing? And so we're not only looking for errors, we're also looking for fraud. In order to do that, we have to obtain an understanding of the district's operations, not only their financial operations, but things that are happening outside of the finance department. Because there might be something happening outside of the finance department that could actually impact the finances, the numbers, right? There are different types of fraud that could be happening within the organization. So from the beginning of the audit, we go through a planning phase. Part of that is having what we call a fraud brainstorming meeting. And so again, we're trying to think about other organizations we work with, our understanding of having worked with your organization, the types of risks that exist. A part of doing that is obtaining an understanding of your internal controls. So if there is a risk, has Ryan, has the team here already thought about it? Here's a risk where something could go wrong. What controls should we put in place so that it doesn't happen? Because you don't want to wait for the auditors to catch it. If something goes wrong, you should be catching that up front, immediately as it happens. I'm also a certified fraud examiner. And one of the things that we know is that fraud sometimes are not caught for 18, the average I think is about 18 months. So by that time, a lot could have gone wrong. So again, it's important that the organization have internal controls to mitigate those risks. Our job as auditors then during that planning phase is to figure out what are the significant risks, what controls are in place. Are they effectively designed, good policy, but also are people actually doing what they're supposed to be doing with respect to those controls? Because you could have a great policy, but if people are not actually performing the controls, then there's a risk there. So once we have that understanding, we develop the procedures to obtain audit evidence to determine whether anything in fact did go wrong. And that's the audit process in a nutshell. Areas of emphasis here are certainly the larger numbers that you have, cash and investments, your revenues, your expenditures. There's a large net pension liability that's on the financial statements. And we do focus on federal awards because you receive federal funding. The federal government wants to make sure that we go through a very detailed compliance audit program to see if your costs were allowable under those grants. That's kind of the big piece of that. And so we do a lot of work in that area. Ryan's already shared that we've issued an unmodified or clean opinion. The audit was performed in accordance with AICPA standards, also in accordance with government auditing standards, which are issued by the Federal Government Accountability Office. Financial statements fairly presented in all material respects. And I'll move on to the next slide here. So government auditing standards report, that's a separate report. There's a report on the financial statements that you would find in a private company. Then there's a separate report in accordance with government auditing standards that talks about internal control and compliance. And so I said we obtain an understanding of internal controls. If we identify a significant deficiency or a material weakness in that internal control structure, we're required not only to report that to Ryan when we identify it, but we're required to report that to you. You can see here that there are no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that were identified through that audit process. Also, from a compliance standpoint, we're not attorneys, but there are certain compliance requirements. I shared some of the federal compliance requirements. There are other compliance requirements with state grants, for example. And so if we identify a problem there, we're also required to report that to you. There were no deficiencies there. You had $19 million of federal expenditures. We audited the major programs as is required under the Uniform Guidance Rules. Those are federal rules. And we had no deficiencies with respect to those federal programs over internal control or compliance. And there is a schedule of federal awards that's included in the financial statements. Our opinion on the financial statements also includes that schedule of federal awards and says that it was fairly presented. Required communication. So the auditing standards require that we communicate these things specifically to the governing board. There were no changes in significant accounting policies. There is a significant estimate, which is the net pension liability. All that means is different from cash. So when we audit cash, we can confirm with the bank, we confirm with the county, wherever the money is. This is an actual hard number. Net pension liability is not a hard number. The actuaries calculate that based, it's an estimate, right? It's a big estimate based on healthcare costs, based on when people are going to retire, all of that. So from an audit perspective, how do we audit an estimate? Well, there's complexity there. Number one, though, we obtain a copy of that actuarial report, and then we obtain also the information that was submitted to the, in this case, FASERA, right? And so CASERA, yeah. And so we're trying to determine whether the actuaries receive the proper information, and then the actuaries do their work. We're not actuaries, but there are those procedures that we do to see if that estimate is reasonable and fairly presented in accordance with the accounting rules. We had no significant audit adjustments. So that is key. It's kind of buried here, but we said you have a clean, unmodified opinion. Probably the governments that you represent also have those clean, unmodified opinions. However, this says there were no significant audit adjustments. What that means is that we actually didn't identify any errors. So if we are doing the audit and we identify an error and the client corrects that error, they can still receive an unmodified opinion. Right? So we find an error, it's corrected, still an unmodified opinion. Well, in your case, we didn't find any errors. So there are no audit adjustments. So that is, unmodified opinion is great. No audit adjustments is kind of a cherry on top, if you will, meaning that there were no errors that were significant or material to the financial statements that were identified by our audit procedures. We had no disagreements with management. So our job as auditors is to be independent. We don't work for management. We work for your board. And if we have a disagreement about how something was done, how something was accounted for, we're required to document that and to present that to you. We had no such disagreements, no fraud or illegal acts that were identified through the audit procedures. Significant risks identified. So these are kind of the key areas that we focused on. Management override of controls is required under the auditing standards, that although you might have a good internal control process, what we know is that frauds sometimes are committed through collusion. And so we are trying to identify any instances where there is a control and somebody in management said, don't worry about it. You know, normally we need 2 signatures on this. Don't worry about it. This time we're only going to have 1 signature. Those are the types of things that we're looking for. And so throughout our audit process, we're focused on that. improper revenue recognition. In governmental accounting, revenue recognition, when a grant should be recorded as revenue or accounts receivable, those sorts of things, or should it be deferred? Some technical accounting stuff, but it's important, and so that's an area of focus. And then some new lease accounting standard that was also a significant risk in this year that we focused on. Usually I have a slide at the end that says questions, but I'm here, glad to answer any questions either now or as I've shared in the past. We're available at any time to answer questions from the board.
Perfect. Any questions from the board members?
Do we get a discount for such a clean slate? Thank you, Ryan. Good work.
I have a funny feeling he's going to say the opposite.
I was that close.
I wanted to ask him a personal question, but I'm not.
Okay. All right. Any questions online? Let's see.
No questions or comments online.
Okay. That's, Member Lewis, please.
Thank you. I still haven't figured out how to push these buttons yet, so I'll get it. I just want to give a really shout out and congratulations to our staff for the wonderful job that you do, and to have this be an ongoing process, to be at this level of accuracy in your budgeting process. I'll just say that back when I was a planning commissioner, our city, Los Banos, had a big issue with fraud, and we lost, I think it was like $1.9 million. And we brought on new staff, changed our processes, and every year we get these special awards for having accuracy in our accounting. And that really means a lot to me as a council member. So carrying forward with this board, I'm really proud of you for what you do and how you handle taxpayer dollars, making sure that they're dispersed properly and that your paperwork follows to show what you're doing. So to Samir and to all the staff, thank you for the job that you do.
Thank you very much. All right.
And I would just highlight that this is so important in the work. One, trust with the public in what we do, because we do ask them to do difficult things. And so that trust is so important. And also in terms of the other dollars that we're able to attract, the programs that we end up running for other air districts for the state, because we clearly are paying attention, staff is paying attention, dotting the I, crossing the T, not taking shortcuts. So this is so important, so basic to what goes on, and thanks for the great work.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we are just, the recommendation is to receive this, so there's no action. We're just receiving it. So appreciate you taking the time to come in here. Ryan and Team Finance back there, thank you very much. I think the Vice Chair had
thank you perfectly.
All right, so we're going to move on to item 8, which is accept and appropriate $137,428,365 in state community air protection funds and reallocate existing funding for vegetative barriers in the Shafter AB 617 community. Exciting stuff.
Mr. Chair, thank you for introducing that lengthy item and its totality. Appreciate that. There's a lot going on here, and building on the great comments from Dr. Sheriff, segueing actually from that last item into this one. This is an example of where the district does have that ability and great responsibility of expending quite a bit of funding here that we're recommending be accepted to be put into these great programs that we run here. So with that, I want to introduce Jess Olson, our Director of Community Strategies and Resources, who's going to walk the board through this item and explain this new funding that we are recommending be put into our incentives budget here.
Awesome. Thank you, Samir. As Samir said, I'm Jessica Olson. I'm the Director of Community Strategies and Resources, and I'm here before you today for your consideration to accept and appropriate over $137 million in state community air protection funds and to reallocate existing funds for vegetative barriers in the Shafter AB 617 community. The district has been successful in advocating for community air protection funds from the state, and these funds are specifically to be used for incentives-based measures in disadvantaged and low-income communities, including those in the community emissions reduction programs that your board has adopted for the 4 CARB-selected communities here in the Valley. The funds are allocated annually, and I'll have a table on the next slide to really enumerate kind of the annual allocations that we've received to date, and they are subject to state cap guidelines, which we'll also go over here in a moment. $201 million in community air protection funds have been provided to the Valley to date. In year 1, which is before we had those 4 selected Valley communities, $80 million was allocated and expended on Valley-wide projects just across disadvantaged communities throughout the Valley. Of course, as I mentioned, they're board-approved community emission reduction programs, or CERPs, as we like to call them, commit over $146 million to incentive-based measures in those 4 communities. And then, of course, as is before you today, there's $137 million, or just over $137 million in additional funding in what we call year 5 and year 6 allocations from the state. That was recently allocated from the 21-22 and 22-23 state budgets. And this does include 6.25% in administrative funding. So the purpose of today's item is to amend the district's adopted budget to increase the community air protection funding allocation. So here's just that breakdown of those year-by-year allocations that we've received from the state so far. So you can see the year 1 through 3 is the total that we've received to date. And here on the right-hand side are the liquidation deadlines, or the deadlines by which we need to pay out all of that funding. This, as I mentioned in my previous slide, has been used for early action and community emission reduction program funding, and the year 5 and year 6 funding are what we're considering today. There was no funding allocation for year 4, so we did not skip that. That was just a year that there was no allocation, and today we're considering these 2 different years. So the next steps with this community air protection funds are to, of course, continue working with Valley communities. That's the way that we spend these funds, is we meet with the community members, both within the selected communities and kind of just throughout the Valley and the various disadvantaged groups that we work with. Of course, that's for those community emission reduction programs, and also for board-approved Valley-wide allocations that your board has recently taken action on really throughout the past year. That includes allocations for locomotives, school buses, and alternative fueling infrastructure. Additional funding allocations based on this new appropriation that we're discussing today will be established through the budgeting process coming up in the next few months. There are some eligible project types for community air protection funds. There is sort of a set guideline that the state puts out for community air protection funds, and it includes heavy-duty equipment, vehicle, and fueling infrastructure projects that are really under the Carl Moyer or Proposition 1B program guidelines, as well as some kind of specific, really specialized programs. So that includes project categories like chrome plating facilities, school buses, and indoor air filtration projects for schools. Those are just some examples of the types of projects that we can work on. We also, as Samir mentioned, kind of have a second recommendation as a part of the action today, and that's to consider the Shafter Vegetative Barrier funding allocation. So just by way of background, especially for those that are new to the board approved the Community Emissions Reduction Program in all 4 of the Valley communities, including Shafter, which was a year 1 community selected actually back in 2018. The approved CERP, or Community Emission Reduction Program, includes a measure for vegetative barriers. And just by way of background, a vegetative barrier isn't necessarily just planting a tree anywhere in the community. It's very specifically and strategically planting trees that block or mitigate pollution or exposure to pollution from certain sources. So say like along a school or along a highway to block pollution from residents in the community. During the CERP development process, which in Shafter in particular happened in 2019, the Shafter Community Steering Committee, which is made up of residents and businesses and local agencies and EJ partners, at the time did not recommend allocating CAP or community air protection funding to this measure. And really the focus originally of this measure was to seek outside funding to provide support for this measure. Since then, since 2019, we of course have been working and meeting monthly or more with the Community Steering Committee, the City of Shafter agency representatives, Kern County, Caltrans, and other interested stakeholders to try to identify funding sources and really support the measure, especially the way that the Community Steering Committee members see it. And while we have potential projects identified and we have worked with the community to identify where those projects could happen, we haven't really yet identified sources of funding to support these projects. At the same time, we do have funding in the SERP that has been allocated for locomotive projects. And we have struggled to find, despite kind of a lot of outreach and a lot of support for that measure, we have struggled to find locomotive project partners kind of despite that extensive outreach. So, given community support and after a lot of discussions with the community, there was a recommendation to reallocate up to $1 million from the locomotive projects that are in the SERP to the vegetative barriers measure projects. There will still be $2.9 million in the SERP for locomotive projects. We'll continue to reach out to local partners, especially looking at very localized projects like switchers that stay within the community. So that's definitely still something we'll work towards, while also supporting the vegetative barriers or interest in providing vegetative barriers for this community. This would not change the overall funding in the SERP. It's just moving from one measure to another. And it's very similar actually to a funding reallocation that your board approved in the Fresno community for urban greening. So I have 4 recommendations before you today to accept and appropriate the community air protection funding from the Air Resources Board for the year 5 and year 6 allocation, to approve the attached budget resolution and amend the 22-23 budget, to authorize the executive director APCO to make administrative changes as necessary, and then of course to reallocate up to $1 million in the CARB and district approved community emissions reduction program from the locomotive measure to vegetative barriers. And that's all I have. Thank you, and I'll take questions.
Can I ask really quickly, the money that's in the program for the locomotive replacement, when does that money have to be, when's the outside that the money has to be spent?
So if these SERPs are 5-year programs, so really all of the programs, although we do have those individual sort of allocations we get from the state, all of the funding needs to be expended by the end of the 5-year term from when CARB adopted, which was February 2020. So it really would be 2025. So there is sort of a deadline we are running against, which is part of this allocation discussion we've had with the committee.
And if they decide they can't find a partner, then they need to move it to a quicker project to spend
Certainly.
money, right? Supervisor Mendez.
Yeah, I think it's a great project. The only thing is, have they secured water, or who's going to water this vegetation?
It's definitely one of the key considerations, Supervisor. Depending on the project, you know, whether it's a roadway project, and maybe Caltrans has more of a responsibility, or the county, depending on where it's located. There's a variety of responses, I think, to that question, but it is one of the main issues with making the project go from a funded to a reality, is making sure that the water supply is there. It does appear that there are some viable projects, but certainly it's been a very lively part of the conversation.
So that's just depending on, that's a hurdle that the deal will have to jump, that there'll have to be a,
Yeah.
yeah,
And of course, selection of the vegetation and, you know, making
Right.
sure that it's
right.
as you know, sort of least water demanding and all is major consideration in those projects.
Okay, and the other thing is locomotives are tier 0, correct? That run up and down the valley?
Very often they are, yes. Very
Okay, I'm
cost
just
effective
pointing that
projects.
out for the public. You know it. I just want that pointed out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Member Preciado.
Yes, just a quick question. I do support AB 617. The question that I have is there a special committee who selects this city to qualify for this program? How is the process for that to get the final?
Yes, that's a great question, Jess. Feel free to weigh in. You know, let me give you my initial response, and if I miss anything, Jess, you know, add to this. Yeah, so there is no special committee that selects communities. Under state law, it's a responsibility of the California Air Resources Board to make those selections. Now, there's a nomination process where every year communities can nominate themselves. There's been interest in the Valley at times from different parts of the community to elevate their capacity and their ability to engage on AB 617 like, you know, processes. So there's been quite a bit of work over the last couple of years to continue supporting those efforts. So even though there's 4 communities that are officially selected where we have these community emission reduction programs, there's quite a few other communities that we have been engaging with, the CARB has been engaging with, where we've been putting resources into supporting community discussions, bringing up, you know, all the resources that we have, including these funds, into those communities. There's quite a bit of work there, and with the hope that over time there's a broader, you know, that the lessons learned in these 4 selected communities and other communities throughout the state that are also being selected get applied on a broader community level basis across all of the communities. And there's been quite a few gains, I think, with that respect over the last couple of years, working with a number of different community-based organizations, directly with counties and others that have communities that have interest in air quality and, want to have forums, want to develop local approaches, and we're very supportive of those efforts. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I was just going to add, I think the benefit and something that I outlined, but can go in more detail about the community air protection funding is outside of those very specific community identified projects like vegetative barriers. The rest of the community air protection funds can be used in any disadvantaged community in the Valley. And that's really, I think, the focus, especially in this coming year, because we didn't add a new community this year, to try to see how we can expend those funds. Like I mentioned, locomotive switchers, heavy duty trucks, tractors, indoor air filtration for schools, a variety of different programs that are already eligible. You do not have to be a selected community to take advantage of.
Thank you. Dr. Pacheco-Warner.
Yeah, thank you. So aside from the community, I have a couple questions. Aside from the community air program, there is all the district also has. Is it true that the district also has other ways to fund locomotives should they want to participate in our programs?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Yeah. So these are allocated and dedicated funds that are within the context of the community program. The steering committee has a lot of information about these. They get involved in outreach, but there are valley-wide programs also through the Carl Moyer program and other programs, whether it's locomotives or other types of equipment, tractors and just a variety. There's passenger vehicle programs. These are all available on a valley-wide basis. So, but the board's priority and with the priority within the CAP funds being focusing on 617 communities, but also having funds available for valley-wide. We don't, because those valley-wide programs come and go. We start off with an amount, they run out. So these funds are dedicated within that community, but there's also there are benefits that can be provided outside of these funds as well.
Yeah, I just want to make clear to our public that we're not giving up on locomotives in the Shafter area by any means, and that locomotives are a priority not only for this board but also for CARB in recent actions, and then hopefully we will see EPA action as well. And so the other thing that I wanted to see, I didn't quite see it in the report, in terms of the reductions that we should expect from the vegetative barriers. Obviously they won't be, the aim is replacing a tier 0 60-year-old piece of machinery, but I mean, they are still going to impact the community. Is that correct?
That is correct. And yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me. It is minimal, of course, yes, compared to replacing a locomotive, but there are actually as opposed to like an urban greening measure, which might provide mostly greenhouse gas benefits. There are studies that show, and there is a quantification methodology depending on the barrier, how tall it is, how wide it is, how thick it is, where it's located. It can actually capture both PM 2.5 and NOx emissions and prevent a lot of impacts that way.
Yeah, that's excellent. And just because I know I was recently looking at data on canopy cover and not Shafter, but communities like Arvin, Lamont, Fuller Acres, and I definitely know there's just, you can only go up in terms of the cover that's needed there. Any vegetative aspects will help those communities greatly, both in what we care about, which is emission reductions, but then also extreme temperatures as well, as new research has shown. So thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, we do have an online public comment from Miss Dora Hernandez.
Morning, Dora.
Dora, see your hand is raised.
My name
Okay,
is Dora Hernandez. I live in the Mexican colony, which is 3 miles south of Shafter. I'm a resident member of the Shafter CSC. And I know our valley air is the worst in the nation, and cardio, respiratory problems, and other problems related to this run rampant. I have lived in the colony for 70 years. I suffer from asthma. My children were raised here, and some of my grandchildren, nieces and nephews, they suffer from respiratory problems. During their early childhood years, a couple of my children had to be hospitalized constantly for respiratory problems. One of them at the age of 7 was hospitalized for pneumonia and valley fever. My mother has never smoked, and she has COPD. During the past 5 years, been hospitalized with congestive heart failure because of complications from that. My youngest son lives with an inhaler in hand because of his asthma and has been hospitalized at least 3 times in the past 5 years for respiratory infections. I am highly excited and glad that this item is on your agenda today. And although it will not clean up our air, it will help mitigate and curtail the poisonous, contaminated, thick dust that rolls into our community during the almond harvesting season. And not only that, but it will help mitigate the dust coming from the traffic around our communities. And I hope I'm speaking in on behalf of the disadvantaged communities outside of Shafter. I highly encourage you to approve the reallocation of those funds to help us out and to approve this highly needed measure. Thank you.
Dora, thank you for your comments.
Okay, I see no further public comment online, no public comment in Fresno. Do we have any public comment in Modesto?
No public comment in Modesto.
Thank you. Any public comment in Bakersfield?
No public comment in Bakersfield.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's Supervisor Couch.
I'll make a motion to approve it, and I just want to say thank you to the staff for working with the Shafter community and for those that were involved in the 617 committee in Shafter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a lot of seconds here. Pick and choose for the 4 staff recommendations. You can call the roll.
All right, Mr. Bessinger,
Yes.
Mr. Couch,
Yes.
Miss Lewis,
Yes.
Miss McCauley, Mr. McCauley, excuse me, sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
Dr. Pacheco Werner,
Yes.
Mr. Pereira,
Aye.
Mr. Preciado,
Yes.
Mr. Rickman,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Sheriff,
Yes.
Ms. Shucklian,
Aye.
Mr. Chiesa.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jess. All right, next is item 9, approval of the district's 2023 legislative platform. Samir and Tom.
Morning, Mr. Chair and board members. I'll start the item off and then proceed to introduce our 30-year veteran, Tom Jordan, our Senior Policy Advisor, to actually walk the board through the platform. And if we can get the presentation up and running, I want to give you a little bit of background before talking specifically about the platform. First, just a quick primer on jurisdictional roles, because I think as we talk about advocating at the state and federal level, it's really important that we're on the same page and have a clear understanding about how air quality management works, local, state, federal level. And we have a couple of new board members as well, but I think it's just a great reminder as we think about pushing some of the various strategies that are in the platform to have this in mind. We as the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, we develop locally here the plans that will bring the region into attainment of federally established air quality standards. Our primary regulatory authority is over what are called stationary sources of air pollution. So this is everything from small businesses, auto body, paint shops, printing operations, all the way up to large industrial sources. Agriculture is also a part of this. Whether it's a dairy, whether it's a large farming operation with a number of engines, perhaps at that source. It's a wide range of what are called stationary sources. We have the primary regulatory authority over those. We also operate, in addition to our regulatory authority, as you just heard in the prior item, a number of incentive-based measures to also help accelerate the deployment of technology, particularly with respect to mobile sources, for which we have very limited regulatory authority. And so while the state and federal governments have the primary authority over those mobile sources, which are now the single largest source of air pollution in our region, after years of regulating stationary sources, over 85% of our air pollution issues are coming from mobile sources. There's a lot of work to be done in reducing air pollution across all these different sources. But the state, the California Air Resources Board, does have a primary authority over regulating vehicle emissions, off-road equipment, other mobile sources, even consumer products. They work with just unique authorities in the state of California. They work with the federal government to exercise those unique authorities here in California. The state also oversees our state's greenhouse gas reduction efforts under the scoping plan that was just recently adopted. Dr. Pacheco Werner, by the way, serves not only on this board, but also in the California Air Resources Board. And they also have some oversight roles over local air districts and metropolitan planning organizations with respect to SB 375 implementation. So while they have that main authority over mobile sources, that we do work with them, they have some oversight roles as well over our stationary source programs. The federal EPA sets the standards. The National Ambient Air Quality Standards are established by EPA. They have primary authority also over trucks, vehicles, trains, planes, locomotives, boats. They also play a role in overseeing our programs here. They ultimately approve, for example, the plans that are developed by the board in conjunction with CARB. They're submitted to EPA. They have that ultimate approval authority. And then, of course, county and city governments, of which most of our board members here serve on, are responsible for land use planning and approval, as well as transportation and mass transit planning, either directly or through the metropolitan planning organizations. That's at the local level, at the city and county level. So just a quick primer on regulatory authorities. Now, why do we need strong advocacy? Well, we have a long history here in the San Joaquin Valley of developing and implementing very effective air quality strategies. We have plans, many plans that the board has adopted over the years. Those plans include a variety of measures, a lot of innovation going on here in the San Joaquin Valley, a lot of emissions reductions that are happening from the implementation of those plans that are developed, again, in conjunction with the state. So us and California Air Resources Board put together what are called state implementation plans. Through those plans, we've reduced our stationary source NOx emissions as one key metric. It's a primary pollutant for both the summertime ozone issues as well as our wintertime PM issues. As a precursor to the formation of PM, it's been reduced by over 90% over the years through the implementation of these various plans and regulations that the board has put into place. Innovative incentive programs have been a key part of this. You've just heard an example of that. We have over $4 billion. I think it's actually nearing $4.5 billion now. Hot off the press sort of numbers every month. That number continues to tick up because we have these really wide-ranging and very large-scale incentive programs that are all about pushing out the latest technology in partnership with our Valley businesses, residents, public agencies. And mobile sources are the majority of our remaining emissions. And so we've seen significant progress, significant reductions, but we also have some very, very unique air quality challenges here due to our geography, topography, ever-tightening federal standards. There's a new PM standard, for example, that's now being discussed just a couple of weeks ago. Federal EPA has proposed their intent to revise that standard. And we're not going to meet these goals due to all of these various challenges without really strong state and federal support. And so your board, at the beginning of each year, puts together and approves the legislative platform, which really lays out the direction and the framework for guiding our advocacy efforts throughout the year, which are led by myself and by Tom here sitting next to me to my left, our policy advisor here. We work very hard throughout the year to make sure that your board's direction and your board's expectations with respect to that assistance at the state and federal level are communicated, and we work with our Valley delegation at the local level through the state legislature as well as at the federal level to pursue those top priorities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Jordan, our senior policy advisor, who is actually going to now walk the board through the various priorities that are included in the proposed legislative platform. And then he'll also introduce several other folks that will help communicate what's happening at the state and federal level.
Great. Well, good morning. So as Samir mentioned, we need significant help to meet our goals, particularly on the mobile source side. While these are in no particular order, the first one, it's maybe not a coincidence that it has to do with seeking resources to fund those incentive programs. That runs the gamut, everything from greenhouse gas funds at the state of California, general fund at times, although that's getting tighter in this past year. At the federal level, there are a lot of new opportunities, and this is kind of a catch-all item that says wherever we can find it, we're going to look for resources. And over the past 20 years, we went from about $10 million a year in incentives to hundreds of millions of dollars in incentives. So it's definitely borne fruit and helped us make the progress that we've seen. Additionally, the state and federal government are both wholly engaged in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we have kind of two statements here dealing with that, and we'll support those measures that they also provide co-benefits. Obviously, there's a lot of the things that the state and federal government do to reduce greenhouse gases that also reduce criteria pollutants or the things that impact public health on a localized level. We'll support those efforts. Also, there's a lot of activity. Samir mentioned the scoping plan at the state level to make plans going forward to get additional reductions. We weigh in on those with an eye to making sure that they're compatible with our activities here, and we'll support those that are compatible and will help us reach our goals. More recently, the federal government has really taken on a lot of activities in this area as well, and so we're keeping an eye on that as we move forward. Just took a large item to you dealing with our disadvantaged or impacted communities here in the Valley. That's a big part of our advocacy, is making sure that we're advocating for funding to help get reductions, a carrot approach to get reductions in those communities in the Valley. The Valley has the 7 of the 10 most disadvantaged communities in California. And so when we're at the state level, we're always advocating for a priority for those communities and any funding that's available. The federal government more recently has also put a high priority on environmental justice and helping disadvantaged communities. So as the federal government rolls out unprecedented funding in the last couple of years, we try to make sure that there's a prioritization there as well for our disadvantaged communities. The next item is more policy oriented. That the Federal Clean Air Act was last majorly amended in 1990, and there's a lot of reasons why it's taken that long to open the act up. But over time, there issues arise, and given the significance of our challenges here in the Valley, we tend to encounter those earlier than others. So we spend a lot of time talking to people at the federal level, including EPA agencies on Capitol Hill, about some of the challenges that have come with an act that hasn't been amended since 1990. That includes everything from dealing with exceptional events when we have wildfire impacts here in the Valley. There's requirements like contingency measures that don't make sense in a region that's doing everything that's possible to do. So we talk about those issues. There's need for federal action on sources that they control, because it's becoming a larger and larger part of our problem. So we basically, touch on all of those. The next one is related to that last issue, making sure that as EPA pushes us at the local and state level to do everything under our authority, we want to make sure that they're doing their part as well to exercise their ability to control emissions, both because those emissions are becoming a larger part. It's also an equity issue. Here in California, for instance, with trucking, the state of California is doing quite a bit to push fleets to have the most modern vehicles, but we have interstate trucking impacting us that the state of California can't really reach. So it's important that the federal government, through both an equity standpoint and also because 99 and I-5 are the main north-south corridor for those trucks coming through our state, that they're doing their part on locomotives, on trucks, on aircraft, and even ocean-going vessels. Yesterday, there was a great event at Frito-Lay talking about what they're doing for sustainable truck fleets. There's a big issue of pushing to get to zero-emission vehicles for everything through heavy-duty big rigs. And that's great. And everyone wants to get to zero. but we want to make sure we don't lose track of the fact that in some cases, like longer haul trucking, it's going to take some time to get there, and we don't want to lose out on opportunities to get almost to zero. There are trucks that are 90% cleaner. We want to make sure we're deploying those as well to get the earlier public health benefits from those equipments. And the event yesterday was a great example. They had both natural gas trucks that are 90% cleaner than diesel, zero emission trucks, and so it's really looking at a duty cycle basis to see what will work for those different types of fleets, and doing whatever is cleanest and not waiting for the perfect, deploying the good when we can. In the last couple of years, the board has worked on phasing out agricultural burning. Both the state and the local agencies have recognized that this is a great effort to undertake, but there needs to be help. And we've been successful at garnering a lot of resources to pay for alternatives to ag burning. That's both policy oriented with the biomass issues and looking for the next generation biomass, also looking for funding, for chipping reincorporation and the like. And so that's a topic both at the state and federal level that we're always talking about. This is kind of an emerging. It's not emerging, but it's become more acute issue. The next one is dealing with SGMA, drought impacts, fallowing of land. So those are obviously huge issues for the valley in a number of ways. But there's also an air quality impact if you're fallowing land and potential dust impacts. And we want to make sure as those processes continue that we're looking for resources to help people deal with any potential air quality impacts, along with the other impacts of the drought related impacts, the SGMA impacts of potential fallowed lands here in the valley. We're always looking for resources to move the ball forward, technology advancement. We're on the cutting edge. We're bumping up against where we've done everything that we know how to do. So we're always looking for the next better equipment. So any resources that are available to move that technology forward is a huge issue, both at the state and federal level. We've been in a region that's demonstrated, and that event yesterday is a great example, the cutting edge often. And we're always looking for financial support and other support to move those technology forward. In that vein, one of the issues that we've worked on recently is underfired charbroilers. Cooking has become a bigger part of the PM challenge, but it's also a localized challenge. So it's not only a challenge for areas like ours that have a PM 2.5 non-attainment. So we're basically, as we've tried to address this on the localized level, it's become more and more clear that the industry would benefit from a standard that goes beyond the valley that deals with this issue and looking at what types of equipment can work for those. It's actually a harder technology challenge than you would think to deal with the grease issues and keep them clean and keep them operating in a restaurant. And so looking to work with our state and federal partners on demonstration projects and potentially a certification to clean up those emissions from commercial cooking operations. Wildfires these have been a huge issue for us for a while, and forest management issues. So that's always top of the mind when we're talking both at the state and federal level. The policies have moved in the right direction, but we want to make sure they keep the eye on the ball and they're actually doing the work to manage the forest so we don't have those significant wildfire events. Over the last 10 years, the worst air quality that we've ever measured here in the valley has all been associated with wildfires. So, while there's exceptional events and all those other issues, we'd rather not deal with those smoke impacts. And so this is always top of mind when we're talking with policymakers to make sure that they continue with that work. It's everything from resources to policies to dealing with NEPA, all those things. It's a very complicated issue, but we want to make sure we're part of that solution with everybody else. So just real quickly, an overview of what we'll be looking to do at the federal and state level. The federal level, it's always a challenge because a lot of parts of the country don't have the significant challenge we have. And a lot of people think of significant air quality challenges as being an urban issue. So we're a more rural area that has significant challenges. So we're always informing people of what those challenges look like and what the solutions look like, and how policy can better help us to do those things. Right now, as Samir mentioned, EPA just proposed a new PM 2.5 standard. We're in the midst of working on meeting the old standard. So informing people what that means, what those different numbers mean to a region like ours. And, you know, when people are arguing between 8 and 10, it becomes kind of an abstract argument. So we try to give them the reality of what that really means to a region. Also, resource-wise, at the federal level, there are it's really a historic time for resources for air quality. We keep looking at the funding sources that we've long relied on. DERA, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, we've done very well in competing for those funds. They've been that category's been plussed up. The Targeted Airshed Program, which we actually helped develop, we were responsible for developing as an earmark years ago, and it's morphed into this program. 103 and 105 grants that help fund operations and other projects. And then obviously the two big bills that have gotten a lot more publicity lately, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act provide significant funding. It seems like daily there's a different federal agency talking about rolling out those programs. So it's a big effort, but we're tracking all those and looking for ways that we can access those funds, and also looking for opportunities for other Valley agencies to take advantage of that funding in ways that can help improve air quality. Also, the Farm Bill has been a big source of funding for us. The EQIP program has provided a lot of funding over the years for replacing tractors and ag equipment. This region actually pushed. That was the first time that those funds had been used for actually hardcore metal equipment on a farm. They also pay for a lot of activities to suppress dust and other things. And so we're entering the beginning of a new Farm Bill development, and we're trying to make sure that we're part of that conversation and sharing that history and talking about sustainable agriculture and working with our ag partners to look at other ways, you know, electric forklifts, all kinds of other things that we can do with potential funding from the Farm Bill. With EPA, there's a lot of activity going on with them right now, and there's, you know, we are in continued communications with them, but we want to make sure that they're approving our plans on a timely fashion, you know, working through that process. Exceptional events, we can flag those wildfire events, but I think when EPA first looked at that they thought it might be one or two events. We're talking about like entire months that we're flagging, and so we need a streamlined process to go through that process and make sure those things that we can't control are being identified and are being subtracted out of our attainment challenge. Guidance, I mentioned contingency earlier. There's these requirements that don't make a lot of sense now. There's been a lot of litigation and court findings that have made that much more challenging. So we need timely guidance from EPA on how to satisfy those requirements, given the court findings. Title VI, the environmental justice requirements of the Act, EPA has been promising guidance. We need to know, we're happy to demonstrate compliance, but we need to know what the roadmap is to make it there. And then finally, as I mentioned, we need the federal government to do their part to reduce sources under their control. At the state level, the state budget is always a huge issue for us. And as I've mentioned, we've done very well in getting resources from the state government. The last few years have been unprecedented budget surpluses, and you know, we've taken advantage of that. I mentioned to Supervisor Mendez before the meeting that the music has stopped and people are looking for chairs. The California went from a huge surplus, and now we're in a deficit mode, and we're trying to make sure the programs we care about aren't eliminated from the budget. And a couple of the categories that have been hard hit are the categories funded by the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Two programs that are hugely important to us, the Farmer Program and the Alternative to Ag Burn, were not included in the governor's January proposal. So we'll work with our ag stakeholders and others in our legislative delegation to try to put a fine point on how important those are and make sure that we get, you know, some funding included for that program to keep it moving forward. And then, obviously at the state level, the bill introduction deadline's coming up, and we'll watch what's out there, and we'll be responding to that. I went through the priorities in our platform. There's another section that's general principles that we use to help guide us if a bill comes out and we need to respond quickly. We tried to cover a lot of those issues of local control, other things like that, so we can, if we need to, respond or come back to the board if we need additional guidance on different bills as they come out through that process. So that's a high-level overview of the platform. I now wanted to introduce some of the advocates that help us and have them give kind of a lay of the land in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. And I was going to start with Sylvia Solis-Shaw with Shaw, Yoder, Antwi, Melcher, and Lang. I think I got that right. Who helps us up in Sacramento. They've represented.
Oh, I can. I heard that.
So as I introduced Sylvia, I just wanted to mention they've represented us not quite as long as I've been here, but almost as long, and it's been a great partnership, and we've done very well, and they've done a great job of representing us in Sacramento and making sure we're getting in front of the right people at the right time. So Sylvia.
Great, thank you, Tom. I have to put my glasses on. Thank you, board chair and staff for making some time for this presentation today. A lot of things have stayed the same in Sacramento, but we're also seeing a significant amount of changes this year. We have 4 new Valley legislators, but overall in the legislature, we've had the biggest turnover since 2012. We expect that to continue for the next few years due to term limits. But of course, the thing that remains the same is that the Democrats maintain their supermajority in each house. I think the Senate, out of 40 members, we have 32 Dems and 8 Republicans now. So I would also note in the Assembly, Speaker Rendon has maintained his hold as leader of the Assembly. However, that is temporary. When the Assembly convened on December 5th, he was elected Speaker, but with the caveat that he would only remain Speaker until June 30th, at which time Assemblymember Robert Rivas, who's from the Central Coast, would take over the speakership. So, and that's a carryover from a little bit of the speakership battle that happened earlier in the year. So that's how that played out, with a little bit of drama even on that day. In terms of committee chairs, we do the bulk of our work in the Assembly Natural Resources Committee. That chair has remained the same. Assemblymember Phil Ting is still budget chair. The big change to note is that Assemblymember Steve Bennett, who's from Santa Barbara County, is now the chair of the budget subcommittee that has oversight on climate, energy, and transportation. So that's a new face for us that we will need to develop a strong relationship with, because a number of the programs that we look to for state funding are going to be heard and discussed in that committee. So farmer, big projects. Over in the Senate, Senator Toni Atkins from San Diego remains pro tem. She has reappointed Senator Lena Gonzalez from Long Beach as chair of Transportation Committee. Senator Durazo will remain chair of the Budget Subcommittee that oversees transportation, but we have a new chair of the Budget Subcommittee that oversees resources, environmental protection, and energy, and that's Senator Josh Becker from San Mateo County. So again, we have had some conversations with him last year, but in his new role, we will again need to really sit down and educate him and his staff on the Valley and the district's needs, and make sure that he partners with us and we partner with him on meeting the Valley's needs. Quickly, just following up on what Tom mentioned in regards to the budget, we've gone from record revenues to a projected $22.5 billion deficit. Yes, the governor proposed the budget on January 10th with $297 billion in proposed spending. But, you know, he had to address the deficit, and in the January 10th budget, he's calling for proposed potential cuts to climate and transportation programs, deferred spending on childcare, and a number of trigger reductions that will go into effect most likely in January of next year if budget conditions do not improve. What I would also note is that the Legislative Analyst's Office has indicated that they think the governor is being too conservative in his projection of the deficit. So that's something that we will need to keep in mind in our advocacy at the state level in terms of budget funding. And another important thing to note is that we are at the very beginning of the budget process. The Senate had an oversight, kind of an overview hearing yesterday, but they will not start, the subcommittees will not start their deliberations until March, and then that continues through May. We see the May revision to the budget, and then there's a lot of hustle and bustle in June until the legislature finalizes its work. And as Tom will also confirm, the budget work does continue usually until later in the session, because there's I mean, at least in the last few years, when we had a lot of money, there was a lot of ways and ideas on how to spend that. Going into the deficit, I don't know if we're going to continue the fun times into August. So quickly moving to bills. We are fairly early on in the bill introduction process. That started December 5th when the legislature reconvened. There's a very slow trickle of bills that are introduced leading up to the February 17th bill introduction deadline. And in those last 2 weeks leading up to that date, you know, it's kind of like when you're studying and you cram at the last minute. Legislators wait usually till the last minute to introduce their bill. So usually in the last week, there's a flurry of bills that we review and we forward to your district staff for their review and input on whether we should take a position of support or oppose, or just continue to watch that item. And lastly, as far as Governor Newsom, he was sworn in on January 6th. He had late in the year last year convened a special session of the legislature to address a proposed windfall tax on oil company profits. That special session has been convened, but no work has been done to date, other than several bills being introduced by both Democratic and Republican legislators. And lastly, I would point out that the governor does have a new chief of staff, Dana Williamson. She was formerly a senior advisor to Governor Jerry Brown. But she comes in to replace Jim DeBoo, who left the governor's administration last year. There also is, and this is not as fresh, but Yana Garcia is now the new secretary for Cali, PA. So we wanted to make sure that the board was aware of that change. The district had a very good relationship with the former Cali, PA secretary, and so we do have to continue to outreach to the new secretary's office and again educate her on our continued needs here in the Valley. So that's my report, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Sylvia. I now want to introduce Lynn Jaquez with CJ Lake in DC. Lynn has represented us for a long time as well, and has helped us navigate the issues back in DC and helped to get our story told. And so, Lynn, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about issues at the federal level.
Thank you so much, and apologies for not being able to be there in person. I would much rather be, but I think I would probably maybe be infecting some of you, as well as having been stuck in Denver due to the snow and flight cancellations yesterday. So in any event, I am here as a headless, at least my head. and pleased to present. I'm going to finish up just a little bit on the 117th Congress before I turn to the 118th, just to amplify a couple of points that both Samir and Tom made, particularly on the funding issue. I know you all know that the funding spigot was turned up full bore over the past 2 years, between the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the FY23 omnibus. So I just want to point out that in our areas of priority, which Tom and Samir stressed on for federal advocacy, which is the EPA programs and the wildfire management prevention programs, as well as transportation programs that reduce mobile sources, billions of dollars have been devoted to those efforts in the last 2 years. And I will highlight that close to $2 billion is coming particularly in wildfire management, prevention, recovery, and USDA, particularly with the Forest Service, is very, very active in allocating the most recent round of almost $500 million that are coming out to the 10% of those fire sheds that include us that are responsible for the bulk of that. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit of it's a fun fact I call, but it's also a bit of a sad fact, and that in 1995, wildfire management, sort of in the last 5 years of that, 95 to 2000, wildfire spending was approximately 16% of the USDA Forest Service budget. And today it is over 70% of the budget. So that, of course, just kind of indicates the magnitude, but also indicates the attention that the agency is giving to our issues, which are a lot of the prevention side of things. And as Tom pointed out, the Farm Bill coming up will provide an opportunity. Final wrap up on sort of the funding issues is the Targeted Airshed Program. DERA funding remained approximately the same despite efforts to increase that funding, but Targeted Airshed continues to grow and was appropriated at a $70 million level, which is almost $10 million above the previous year. So we continue to advocate very strongly, and we enjoy significant support from key members of the Appropriations Committee as well as our California delegation. So that is really kind of a wrap up. In addition, the board and the executive team with Samir and Tom devoted many hours and a couple of trips to DC in order to meet with our delegation, present updates on our state implementation plan, and implore the EPA to do the right thing, if you will, when it comes to our approval process. But a great deal of education and outreach was accomplished this past year as Congress and the houses in the different chambers continued to open up post-COVID. Turning now to the outlook for the 118th Congress, I'm happy to report that we have the speakership of the House of Representatives still in the hands of a member of the California delegation, which is always very helpful to any of our initiatives within the state. You all, I'm sure, were aware of the drama that was attached to that vote and the C-SPAN coverage, but ultimately, while placing a couple of the organizing items and the organizing of the committees on hold, it is now over and done with, and we are at least set for the change in majority in the House, a very slim majority. And currently, 5 on election day, 213 Ds to 222 Rs. However, with the passage of a member from Virginia in November, there is a vacancy. And so that majority is down to 4 as far as losing votes are concerned, although we will have a special election in Virginia to fill that seat, and it will remain in D hands. There are a couple of other sort of unknown seats, such as one in New York that we do not know may or may not be vacated, may flip. And so we just always keep an eye, on that majority because it makes it very difficult to govern. I'm going to point out that because there was sort of so much happening on the House side, given the change in majority and all of the attention given to the leadership races on that side, that the actual election outcome for the Senate has been slightly overlooked. And while it still is an extremely small minority, 51 to 49, what that flip does, or what it did, was eliminate the requirement of the Senate and the Senate committees to operate under a bipartisan memorandum of understanding, which it had to do when it was 50-50. So Leader Schumer and Minority Leader McConnell had to reach agreement in the 117th on committee ratios, on exactly memberships, on staffing, on budget, on just about everything that governed committee action in the Senate. And going forward, with that clear 51-49 majority on the D side, that accommodation no longer needs to be made. So the committee ratios will change. The chairmanships are still being determined on both the House and the Senate side. The big four and the big six from the House committee selections have been made by the Steering and Policy Committee, but additional chairmanships are ongoing. The House and Senate are out this week. They will come back and resume their conversations next week. And a lot of the Democratic appointments have yet to be made because the committee ratios have yet to be sorted out between the new minority and the incoming majority. I think we can safely say that we are expecting quite a bit of oversight activity in the House on the amounts of funding that have headed out the door from both the reauthorization bills, the tax bills, and the omnibus bill for spending, oversight activities, as well as the House majority having pledged to hold level the FY24 spending levels, to freeze it essentially, and to address deficit reduction in a very serious and timely fashion. And I won't bore you with kind of what that means for the debt ceiling limit, because that's kind of inside baseball. We are going to remain, obviously, DC is all aflutter about that, but we are going to remain just very focused on the appropriations process, on the committee oversight process, and ensuring that our federal objectives are advanced both in the funding and in the grant process of the money that has already been allocated, in future funding, and then in responding to any kind of opportunities that may exist to further our interests and programs in the Farm Bill, because we do expect that to be a major authorization effort this coming year. With that, the only other little fun fact that I'm going to share with you from a federal membership, congressional membership perspective, is that while the octogenarian set seems to get a great deal of attention as far as the membership in the House and the Senate, the elderly hold sway. I will also point out that, interestingly, although maybe some of them may be elderly, but over 75% of the members of the House and the Senate have been elected in the last 10 years. So that's a huge turnover, and one that makes our efforts to continue to get to know the new members of our delegation, as well as those on relevant committees, ever challenging and occurring every new Congress as new members join us. And one member of that new generation coming in is the newly elected member from New York of the Gen Z, 25-year-old. So lots of changes, lots of opportunities that changes bring. So with that, happy to respond to any questions.
Great. So just to close, unless Samir wants to add something. So once the board adopts the platform, while our advocacy efforts continue, we'll take the new platform and make efforts to educate our delegations, both at the state and federal level, on our priorities, and obviously keep you guys updated throughout the year as things come up. So with that, Mr. Chair, turn it back over to you.
Member Bessinger.
Thanks, Chair. During our conversations with legislators, whether it's in Sacramento or Washington, I had a very unfortunate
trip back there in 2019 where I was with the Council of Governments. And one of the items, I was wearing several hats at the time, but I was having a conversation with a congressional aide about forest management and the fact that we had 1 million dead trees in Fresno County alone, and that we needed loggers and fellers because we were looking at a catastrophic situation, and we can't be expected to meet air pollution goals and have that kind of situation. And this person looked at me like I had fallen off a turnip truck. The contempt is probably the word that would probably be the best way to describe it. And I'll be frank, I want to put my hands on them. When we have conversations with whoever it is, when they talk about caring about the environment, you can't care about the environment and endangered species and not care about the health of the forest. You can't be an environmentalist or even an EJ person and say, and logging is awful, because what are you going to do with the dead trees? You can't say, I care about endangered species when they go up in smoke, because we don't take care of that. You can't, when they start talking about the economy, you have to remind them that farmers feed most of this nation out of this valley and are huge employers. Same with manufacturers, same with trucking. When you want to, when we're talking to the EPA or even Cal EPA, when they start talking about electrifying the truck fleet, well, that's nice. But what are we going to do until then, until that's invented and perfected? So you can't, please remind them that they can be an environmentalist and everything, but they got to be a realist too, because we live in a real world. And it was, I have to say, it was very disheartening. And this was a Republican's person. And so having those conversations with them, if you could remind them that they can't be one and not the other sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pacheco-Warner?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the update and the platform. And obviously, however I can be of help on the farmer and ag burning, as those are hugely important to me and to our public health in the valley to continue to turn over that equipment. So however I can be of help on that. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about the either adding here or how we can think about for next year. I think that from my time, on CARB, on the transition to zero emissions, one of the things that I continue to see being ignored is the lack of readiness of our infrastructure in the San Joaquin Valley to really do that well. And I mean, not just the San Joaquin Valley, but other rural areas throughout California. And there doesn't seem to be enough action other than there's money being thrown at the problem, but not really looking with that equity lens of, where we really are at and, to the point where there is speculation that if we look at our electrical maps that there's readiness in the San Joaquin Valley, and if you look east to west where our trucks are going to be moving, that's not true. And so I'm wondering if we can take this opportunity here to see how we can add to the conversation, the legislative conversation around readiness. I know that there's things happening around permitting that's important, but really, it's connected to everything that we're asking our businesses, our residents to do. And so, but there seems to be this huge gap, and I do think that we've got to get if no one's going to say it, somebody has to say it. And I think given the millions of dollars that we're spending on Zero, we have to say something. So I wanted to see what the energy or willingness on some of that is from our staff, our board, and certainly our consultants here. And then I know you mentioned getting together with our delegation, and I'm wondering if there's also going to be a briefing with our congressional delegation on the ongoing NAPS conversation, specifically because, as I mentioned at the study session, I really want to see whatever comes down as the new standard come with commitments of either funding or rulemaking from EPA as well. And I think if we can preempt it rather than have them just announce it and then go from there, if we can apply the pressure now, I think that might be an important opportunity. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just a quick response to we allow the board to deliberate on the suggestions that Dr. Pacheco-Warner just raised. I think the platform at a high level, I think encapsulates what Dr. Pacheco-Warner was stating. But I do think that if the board was willing to move forward with maybe a more specific outlining of the need that Dr. Pacheco-Warner raised, which is a advocacy around the need for the San Joaquin Valley to be prioritized with respect to infrastructure. That is, as we move forward towards the cleaner vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure, for example, is one of those areas that we specifically request that infrastructure. And there is new funding, for example, that is being put forth under some of the federal funding packages, for example, that it would be our plan to articulate that anyway, I think, under the priorities that we have here. But it is helpful, I think, to just make sure that specific point is raised and that we're engaging on those issues, because Dr. Pacheco-Warner is correct. If you don't have major infrastructure investments made, upstream of where you want to see charging and all of that, you don't have the capacity to do some of the things that we're expecting folks to do. So it is something that we could integrate probably under either the climate funding package section or under the funding for clean air project section. Just make sure that there's a sentence at least in there so it's clear that that's something that we're requesting and are advocating for. That's my suggestion, if the board is willing to include that as part of, say, a potential motion. On the issue around briefing the congressional delegation, certainly is our intent as we understand and unpack the potential proposed PM standard. One of the things that we would be looking to do, and as part of our current practice, would be to provide through a variety of means education and information to our congressional delegation around what it means to meet these standards, the needs that we have. To Dr. Pacheco-Warner's point, what our requests would be on the federal level to help with addressing those federal sources that would otherwise make it very difficult for the region to meet those standards. So that is something, just from an approach point of view, that as we learn more about the standard and what it means for the region, that we certainly would want to provide that education. It is early. It was just discussed, just a couple of weeks ago. There's quite a wide range that's being proposed. There's no specific standard actually being proposed. It's actually a range. So we're still looking at that with our partners at CARB to really get a better feel for what that standard means. As that information becomes available, obviously we'll be sharing that with the governing board, but also, working with our various delegations to communicate with them as well. Just wanted to give a little response on that component of the question. And with that, I'll turn it back to, there seems to be other board members that have some questions, decisions as well.
Yep. Member Mendez.
Yeah, Len, want to say hi and just ask about access. Have they changed? I know it got pretty restrictive. You couldn't even get into especially on the House side, you couldn't even get in the building without having a staffer come and get you. What's going on now with that?
Yes, we're back open, which is great. And a lot of that had to do more with staffing from the Capitol Police at all of the House building exits and the Senate exits. So the House House and Senate are open for appointments. You can walk in without having to have a staff member. You just say, hey, I've got a meeting, I'm heading in, I'm going to a hearing. So that is wonderful to be able to, as we were making the rounds on January 3rd for all of the swearing in ceremonies. It was great just to be walking around and not having to take a staffer's time. On the Senate side, there's still an appointments desk that you, after you go through the mag and bag, you report to and just say, I'm headed to the, Hart, or I'm headed to Dirksen, or I'm heading to whatever. But it is, so the buildings are accessible. It still is somewhat hybrid in the individual offices as to whether they do a combination of virtual and in person. And in the agencies, it's the same thing. It totally depends upon the individual office that you are seeking a meeting with. But the access to the buildings is back to free restrictions time.
Okay, I just want to say too, that if I do make it back there, I'll try not to play any practical tricks on you while I'm back there like I did last time.
I look forward to it, sir, every time. So can't wait to
Okay.
welcome all of you back in DC, and just just trust that it's not in the February to March timeframe, because it'll be nice and sunny for you.
Thank you.
With the ball game or two, how about that?
Yeah.
Lynn, Member Mendez was just joking about how he likes to play tricks on you. So I don't know that I would take him at his word on those comments. But I do want to say that I appreciate the comments from Member Dr. Pacheco Warner in regards to infrastructure. Thank you for that. Also, Member Bessinger, thank you for your comments in regards to forest management. I definitely agree. When we talk about a single species and sacrificing the entire forest for one species, that's really not common sense. And thank you to staff for itemizing everything on our priorities. Especially appreciate the inclusion of wildfire management in there. But I did want to ask a quick question pertaining to, I think, ag burning alternatives and what's included under that. Do we have the Climate Catalyst Fund, or are we looking at that at all? I know that was something that's a revolving loan fund that had been available to private enterprise previously. Specifically, the board may appreciate the biomass plant that's being constructed up in North Fork, which I think was depending on this fund to kind of get them across the finish line. And it would appear that that was not funded in the governor's budget. So I just wanted to see if you had any comments on that, or.
Well, Tom, add to this if I miss some here, but just a quick rolling back a little bit to the ag burn alternatives and the phase out that the board adopted. The board was able to successfully advocate in 2 budget years ago, I think the 21-22 budget, the inclusion of $180 million specifically allocated to the San Joaquin Valley through us to support the deployment of these different alternatives. There's a range of them, but primarily involves chipping and grinding and either working the material into the ground or using the material and other beneficial type uses. But there are some other alternatives available as well. We also use that funding to grow the capacity of the various chipping and grinding services. There was some money allocated for that as well. And I'll actually provide a little bit more information in my APCO comments about where that is as a whole. I've got a slide that I want to share with the board. But that money is available now. It's being expended. But we have an ongoing request because there are a couple of remaining phase out deadlines. One that just at the end of this last year. There's another one coming at the end of this year, and the full phase out happens by the end of 2024. And so there is going to be an ongoing need to support the deployment of these alternatives. And so we have a pending, and I would call a high level request. It would be everything from the appropriation that we saw that we're using now through the state funding source. But as I think you're alluding to as well, I mean, there's state funding opportunities. Maybe there's next generation renewable energy type utilization of that woody waste stream. It could be a state level, budget level. It could also be the federal level. There's quite a bit of funding available for a variety of ag-related, sustainable ag-related kinds of investments. And so we're definitely trying to unpack what that means, especially in the context of a reduction in some of these other alternatives. There are some of the older biomass plants. We've seen those continue to be shut down due to a variety of other factors. As those shut down, they actually still process quite a bit of woody material in addition to the on-site chipping and other practices that are being deployed. So there is going to be a growing pressure on the system, if you will, in terms of the ability to handle these different waste streams. And we need to be looking, all in terms of what can be done to make sure that we're still in a feasible, viable condition as we move forward with the phase out, as we see other alternatives continue to be impacted. That could include, like you're talking about, there are a lot of discussions around renewable energy, whether it's for electricity production, whether it's for fuels production. There's forest waste. It's also obviously a big part of that conversation. So we're definitely, the advocacy, I think, would be at multiple levels there in terms of what options might make sense. And Tom, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that about covers it. But I would say that in general, we're looking across the board on ways we can support those activities. So I think that would include the Climate Catalyst Fund and other things that would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Member Preciado.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the delegation teams at the state level and federal level. I know that we probably get most of the funding available at times, but the needs in the Central Valley is probably bigger than those needs in other regions of the state. And we also know that there's always misunderstanding in Sacramento when it comes to needs for the Central Valley. Every region of the state has different needs. And when those needs come into place, we would like to talk about equity, and equity goes a long way. It's hard to meet. Infrastructure is a big need. Understanding the water for our farmers. I think we show a big teamwork here in the Central Valley, working with farmers, working with business people, working with the community, trying to do the best to improve the air quality. But at the same time, when it goes to Sacramento, they don't see those needs. They see other needs. They don't see the need of people putting food on the table. Here, over there, they get more for recreation, other needs. So I think we need to have a strong team. I think it is time to reach out to the elected officials. I know we are numbered when it comes to assembly members and senators from the South and the Bay Area. But at the same time, we need to form a strong team that can advocate not only with our delegation team, but we need to show more presence and pressure more for the needs of the Central Valley. And that's the only way we can really get attention to the needs of the Central Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the outside world, I own a furniture store, and I would just like to see an increased dialogue with the federal government in regards to, like in this particular case, interstate trucking. So we have some interaction here with that board there, and in some cases, they've made some restrictions that they themselves are contributing to. But specifically, if they were to convert today to the electric vehicles with trucking, because I work with truckers regularly, they say it's about 6 weeks. Pardon me, 3 weeks. Whereas it currently takes about 3 days to get across the United States. So until they work out those issues and there's a good dialogue, like specifically one of the options you mentioned was the clean air, the clean gas. That sounds like a good option. I just want to keep those lines open because we already, with supply chain issues, have some serious trucking issues. Currently, I'm looking at about 6 weeks, where I used to look at 10 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's all the comments I see from the board. Do you have anyone online?
We do. Ms. Janet Dietz-Gamay.
Thank you. People are sick in the San Joaquin Valley from the air we are breathing. There are thousands of us who have asthma. thousands of us who have asthma. And then there are those who have other respiratory diseases, but we are all affected by the air in this valley. Especially bad is the winter months when we have our inversion. We have been having better air because the rain is bringing the pollution down, but we are all exposed to this air, and we all will have some reaction to the air we are breathing. I have asthma, and there are other effects that are being effects on our bodies, on our heart, on our brains, on various parts of our bodies. We are all affected by the air we are breathing, which is toxic. During wildfires are now a norm. I spoke of climate change at the beginning of this meeting. Wildfires are now a norm. Fortunately, 2022 was not bad for us here, but it is a norm. It is something that we are breathing. All of the data, all of the charts, all of it means nothing. What matters is what is going into our bodies. We are both urban and rural. We have the 5th largest city in California, Fresno. So we are both urban and rural, and we have issues for both. I am pleased that the Forest Service is getting more funding because the Forest Service has been spending its funding on fighting fires. And that is good news to me that the Forest Service will now have money to do forest management. Bottom line, we are all affected by what we are breathing in the San Joaquin Valley. Thank you for the work you are doing. Let's keep our eyes on the prize. Thank you.
Mr. Chris McLaughlin. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow members of the board. My name is Chris McLaughlin with the California Cotton Ginners and Growers Association and the Western Agricultural Processors Association. Thank you for the time to speak today. As a representative of the agricultural industry, representing the regulated community and living within the district myself, I would like to first offer support for the proposed legislative platform. As staff has highlighted in this presentation, as well as the previous presentation, innovative incentive strategies have been a critical component of achieving the emission reductions demonstrated on the graphs within the boardroom itself. CARB staff has also recognized that the incentive programs administered through the Air District have been integral in reducing specific category emissions targeted throughout the state. While we support the approved legislative platform, I would also like to use my time to convey our frustration with the governor's proposed 2023-24 budget. We appreciate the optimistic prospect of increased federal funding within the district, and we echo the sentiment that goals are met through strong federal and state support. Reductions and removal of vital state incentive fundings for programs covering required emission reduction categories makes California agriculture less competitive globally. Our organization commits to working with the district to fight for necessary funding to help the district achieve further reductions, both state and federally, and achieve standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments.
One more online, Ms. Cynthia Pinto Cabrera.
Hello,
Welcome,
good
Cynthia.
morning. Hello, good morning, and Happy New Year. Cynthia Pinto Cabrera with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. And it's encouraging to see in this presentation and in my own review of the legislative platform that the Air District is naming climate change and addressing greenhouse gas emissions as a priority for this legislative platform, this year's legislative platform. And as the district looks towards implementing this platform, we continue to urge that the Air District consider public health and social costs with a focus on equity and environmental justice. For example, the upcoming plan development for the 2012 PM 2.5 standard is an opportunity to include these assessments. There's an ongoing need to address outstanding issues like the lack of contingency measures, stronger enforcement, to address some loopholes, and issues like the emission reduction credit banking system. And in order to restore clean air, we really need stationary sources to be cleaned up, especially sources that are located near sensitive receptors that are disproportionately impacted by pollution, and which include pregnant people, people who work outdoors, people who have existing health conditions, children under 18, those over 65. That's a massive population that we really need to worry about and are all exposed to air pollution, and that can negatively impact our health. This equity-based approach would complement portions of the district's legislative platform, like supporting impacted communities and the goals for a streamlined and efficient implementation of Clean Air Act mandates. Valley Air can and should do more to address community concerns and to achieve real reductions for Valley residents. Thank you for the opportunity to comment and for your attention to health and equity and justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No further comment online or in Fresno. Do we have any public comment in Modesto?
No public comment in Modesto.
Thank you. Any public comment in Bakersfield?
No public comment in Bakersfield.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Sylvia and Lynn, I appreciate all you do. We have strong advocates both in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. I think that funding is going to be harder to come by in the 2023 year. I'm not sure that it was, we were as vocal as we could have been here today, because I think it's going to be an issue going forward, which means that, you know, I want the advocates to lean on us also, especially when trying to push through bills that might impact our local legislator. Please feel free to lean on us. I think we need to spend time, all of us, when we travel to Washington, D.C., with our cities, our counties, with our COGs, that you try and include the Air District if you can. I know that Regional Policy Council, Tom has always been a participant, and Samir, and I think it adds great value in these trips to have them, because of the shared goals of, if we don't get our air quality in line, transportation funding becomes imperiled. And so everything is interconnected. And even if they don't participate, I think taking the message of air quality through your own jurisdictions is a benefit to all. So I think we're going to have to spend more time both in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. Obviously, it's easier to get to Sacramento, but it's something that we need to make a priority in this year and going forward, because as Tom always reminds me, that plus up programs, a Tesla truck costs $250,000 this year, and next year it's $280,000. So if we don't get just natural inflationary factors or plus ups in programs, then we don't even accomplish what we did the year before. So very important. So with that, we are going to, this is an action item.
Motion.
Make a motion to approve.
Have a motion?
Second.
I just wanted to
Yeah,
clarify.
Absolutely.
Clarification if we can include my amendment on the language on infrastructure, as Samir suggested.
Make the motion, the person who's
I
second.
figured it was part of it.
Okay with the amendment, the amended. Okay. All right. Roll call, please.
All right. Mr. Bessinger,
Yes.
Mr. Couch,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. McCauley,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
Dr. Pacheco Warner,
Yes.
Mr. Pereira,
Aye.
thank you, Mr. Preciado,
Yes.
Mr. Rickman,
Yes.
thank you, Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Sheriff,
Yes.
Ms. Shuklian,
Aye.
Mr. Chiesa.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Motion passes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us, Lynn. Thanks, Sylvia. Now we're going to move on to item 10, verbal report on California Air Resources Board activities. Dr. Pacheco Warner.
Yes, thank you. I did just want to highlight, what is possible with collaboration between CARB and our air board that we saw yesterday, and a big commitment to our staff and the amazing work they did to set up this zero near zero fleet demonstration project. And I think that's, projects like what we saw in Modesto, where we're having, integrated into every part of the operation, these practices that are cleaning up the air. I think we can do a lot more and make the dollars go further when we do these. And I imagine as dollars begin to get away, we're going to need to do more of that collaborative work. So I just wanted to mention that, and I think our staff is so great at it, and just speaks to the great collaborative spirit they have. I did want to let you know the Advanced Clean Fleets conversation is still ongoing. Staff are still meeting with people throughout the end of the month around feedback on that. There is a draft of that available, that language, which is for our New York board members. Advanced Clean Fleets is a rulemaking that's happening at CARB around the transition of medium heavy duty vehicles to zero emissions. And so definitely there's still room for engagement, both from in your capacity as this board members, but also in your other capacities as well. I did want to mention this next week, we will be hearing our ozone plan that we discussed at last month's meeting. So definitely appreciate the vibrant discussion on that last month, and now it's going up to CARB next week, and that is our ozone plan that will be included in the larger state implementation plan. Upcoming, we also have that following day, so next Friday, our first hearing of 2 for amendments and rulemaking around the use of hexavalent chrome in operations here in California. We do have some here in the San Joaquin Valley as well. I myself actually got a chance to tour a facility in Clovis that has transitioned away from hexavalent chrome into the trichrome space as well. So really, really glad to see that we're a step ahead, and I think it is that is going to have an impact on across the San Joaquin Valley as well. Not as much as South Coast, but certainly here as well. So I want to make sure you guys knew about that. And then just I do want to mention that there are going to be upcoming opportunities this year. There's a lot coming up ahead. Not as much as it won't be as exciting as last year in terms of the amount of rulemaking we had last year, 23 meetings. But we will be, taking on important things to consider. So just wanted to let you know that CARB does expect to see another very active rulemaking year, and as always, I encourage all of you to be engaged in all of your capacities and in that, and anything that you want me to take back. Obviously, I will take it back, and you can bet I'm trying to ask and hold everybody accountable for anything having to do with electrification and equity, as I see it, in terms of making sure that we are set up to succeed here in the San Joaquin Valley on that piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Am I the only one who will be Googling hexavalent chrome after this, or
Okay. There you go.
did Did you? I didn't want it to be obvious.
That's good.
Stuff that makes stuff shiny.
Yeah.
All the metal is shiny.
It's using chrome plating.
Yeah.
Chrome plating, yeah. A lot of uses. A lot of the biking community is one example, and car collectors and
Yeah.
others, but a lot broader than that. But yeah,
Chroming, yeah.
chroming, yep.
All right, so on to the executive director's report.
Oh, thank you, sir. Just had a couple of other items to bring to your attention. Was mentioned earlier that EPA has proposed to revise the annual PM 2.5 standard. Just wanted to make sure the board was aware that we're definitely taking a look at that right now and trying to understand, everything about that proposal so that we can continue to inform the board and the public and take feedback on what that means for the San Joaquin Valley. So just more to come on that, I think, as that unfolds. And related to PM 2.5, there's quite a bit of activity going on this year with our attainment planning. Just wanted to let you know that you'll soon be hearing about contingency measures. For example, there are requirements that we need to meet this year with CARB to submit some documentation to EPA. They've got commitments to also move forward with with that level of documentation. So you'll be hearing more about this in February and beyond in terms of where those are, and as was mentioned earlier during one of the public comments, continued development of any needed plan amendments or updates related to the 2012 PM 2.5 standard. That's also a priority this year, along with working on a couple of what are called maintenance plans. So for standards that the Valley has reached attainment on, you also have to continue writing plans for, even once you're in attainment of a standard. So there are attainment plans for ozone and PM10 that are also in development. So quite a bit going on under the Clean Air Act and with various planning requirements. We didn't talk much about that during the regular agenda. Just mentioned that you're going to be hearing some more about that in the coming months. If we could call up, maybe, I think I have a slide or two that hopefully is ready there. Wanted to share with you a little bit more information about the ag burn phase out strategy. This is obviously a very high priority for the Air District. There's a deadline that just recently passed at the end of last year related to both vineyard removals as well as some of the few remaining orchard removal categories. The vast majority of orchard removals have already been prohibited from burning for many years, but there were still a few categories left related to small farming operations. What this information here shows you, now that we've concluded last year, which was the first full year of the new phase out strategy that your board has put into place. And there's a lot of information going on here, so I'll just try to focus in on the relevant information here. So the box, the left-hand portion of this graph, and there's a blue box around it, those are the last several years, basically, here in the San Joaquin Valley, of how much burning has been authorized under our programs year by year. So starting with 2019, 2020, 2021, you see some, pretty high baseline years there of burning. Combination of orchard removals, vineyard removals make up the bulk of that burning. Coinciding right there, starting in about 2019, the board here adopted and we launched our Alternatives to Open Burning grant program, locally funded. This is before we were able to advocate and successfully bring the state funding into the program. And you start seeing a decline there in burning. In 2021, your board adopted I should probably put a little call out there so that's also clear on this graph, the actual phase out requirements. And then last year in 2022, coinciding with the phase out as well as the deployment of the new state funded resources that we're using here locally now, you see in 2022 a pretty dramatic drop. That might even be an understatement in burning in 2022 for the totality of that year. Massive reductions, actually the lowest year ever for burning. Even before there were requirements phasing out burning, we saw even back before the drought, before the biomass plants shut down and caused a lot of the issues that we saw with the uptick over the last several years. That drop, was not even as dramatic as we saw this last year. So definitely a lot of progress being made with respect to burning. The graph on the right, so if you just imagine that call out box and you kind of zoom it over to the right, coinciding with that drop in burning, what that shows you is how much material is being handled to the alternatives that we're funding through that local alternatives grant program. And so big reduction in tonnage being burned and a large reduction in tonnage that is now being handled through the chipping and grinding and some of the other alternatives that are in that program. Direct relationship between the burning and the alternatives that are being deployed by farmers throughout the valley that get credit really for working with us and are now moving forward with these different alternatives. There's still a lot of work to be done. It's still very difficult. The few remaining deadlines that are left are all associated with the smallest farming operations. So your board has taken quite a bit of actions, and there's a lot of outreach going on. There's extra incentive funding that's available for those smaller farmers. We're doing a lot of work to make sure everybody's aware of these funds and that we also turn around these requests very quickly. And you're going to be hearing more about this in the coming couple of years as we work to successfully bring this transition into place, especially for those hardest to tackle categories and with the smallest farming operations that have the most difficulty in securing these services and moving forward with these different alternatives. So just want to provide a quick update on that, and then share with you the Frito-Lay event came up a couple of times. So I wanted to give a big shout out. We had a large number of board members that came to this event, primarily from the north, but also with CARB involvement and Dr. Sheriff, who was actually involved in this project early on and was a big proponent of this project. There's an image of just a wonderful turnout at the event. In the center of the screen, that's actually the CEO, Stephen Williams. He's actually the CEO of PepsiCo Frito-Lay for North America, who came out, and we had congressional representation there. Chair Chiesa had the best speech at this event. Did a really, really tremendous job representing the Valley. And
it's because you wrote it.
Not true. Personal stories about the facility, and obviously that being where the area that chairperson is from, and just a lot of great energy in terms of looking at these different technologies, zero emission, but also the near zero emission, and just the efforts that are going on that are being done right here in the San Joaquin Valley, the innovation that's happening right here in our region. First Tesla trucks actually anywhere in the world are actually we're a part of deploying those. Literally the first project anywhere right here in the San Joaquin Valley. So just wanted to recognize the chair and all the board members for all your continued support and just doing a great job representing the Valley and moving these really important projects forward. And with that, I'll turn it back to the board and the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any comments here? Questions? Okay.
I do have a question. So when we're talking about ag burning, also there's other agencies like compost facilities that sometimes they don't have the equipment to stop a pile of mulch burning, and that can go for weeks sometimes. It happened last time, and they said they didn't have the equipment to work on it and stop the smoke for a prolonged time. Is there any funding available to them? Or is there any help, any potential help that they may be able to get equipment or help them stop the burning that actually happens for sometimes weeks over time? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be happy to look into that. There's definitely funding for replacing existing equipment. I mean, through some of the different programs that we have. When you're growing a fleet, it becomes a whole different situation. In terms of that kind of there really isn't a natural funding place for that. But I do think that if this is an issue across the Valley, if composting facilities are not able to basically operate effectively, don't have enough money to basically set up their operations the way that they need to be able to timely process the materials that are coming in. I haven't heard that before. I do know that they store certain materials, and when you do store them, you can have issues like internal temperatures increasing and maybe something happening, some kind of combustion occurring. That's happened from time to time. There are requirements also under our rules and other rules about how fast you have to process this material so that it's not sitting for longer than it needs to. But it's definitely something that I'd be happy to look into and if there's a broader issue, for sure, maybe there's actually an advocacy position or something. We can actually go look for funding to assist these different composting facilities. But typically the way that my understanding would be that if they actually had a need to purchase more equipment and all that, then you're probably raising tipping fees at some point to basically cover your costs. And if they're falling short operationally, there's usually mechanisms that you need to use to basically grow your operation to make it happen. And my understanding is you generally pass those. Unfortunately, you pass those costs on to your customers through increased tipping fees, but there may be more complicated factors on that side as well that I think we need to be aware of. So we're happy to look into that, and definitely would want to see the cleanest equipment deployed. So if they're looking for new equipment to process that, and you have a choice between different levels of equipment, if there's funding to buy the latest tier equipment and make that as clean of an operation as possible, I think there's a good argument to be made for looking for that funding as well. So maybe I can circle back if you connect me with your facilities folks, we're happy to look into it and see if that's something that we can support.
I have a question. Did we have an item earlier where it talked about a cut in the farmer and ag burn funding from the state, and how is that going to affect all that we're talking about right now and all that needs to be done?
Yeah, so that was definitely part of the discussion. We didn't spend a lot of time on that issue during the legislative platform, but definitely something that we're very concerned about. If not funded, it is early in the budget process right now. It's a January proposal. There's conservativeness being applied to the revenue projection, so we're definitely going to be working. But if there isn't funding in the farmer program, we'd be losing basically the most cost-effective program that the state actually puts into place for achieving those really big reductions that we get from our ag fleet, tractors, the ag, all-terrain vehicles, utility terrain vehicles that are used, electric options. We're actually growing that program into a lot of different areas. A lot of focus on small farmers. So most of the fund, the higher levels of funding actually go into the smaller farming operations. So it'd be a really big missed opportunity on the part of the state to not fund what is actually being used to support and underwrite the biggest and most cost-effective reductions that the state is actually banking on in the context of the plans that we're pulling together. So that is our message. We're engaging with the governor's office. We know that stakeholders in the Valley are very concerned about this. And so we look forward to seeing how we can make sure that funding is included in the
Is
budget.
there anything that, each of us in our respective jurisdictions could do also to support that, and say like the farm bureaus or whatnot? Are we at that point yet?
Yeah, we're right at that point. We will definitely be engaging and letting the board know how, as a Valley, including your respective jurisdictions, can all basically, be saying the same thing, talking the same message about how to make sure this funding is there. So you'll be hearing from us as that unfolds. There likely will be letters and other things involved with that to make sure, that, and we're refining the message kind of based on what we hear from the governor's office, from legislators. So that there'll be more to come on that for sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Samir? Okay, on to item 12, governing board member comments.
Who's got something
Yep.
to say?
Please.
Sometimes you gotta kind of be careful what you hear. Like the other day, I heard the Steel saying, this is a new record. We had 8 atmospheric events in a certain period of time. So what I do is I talk to my old meteorology people that, have been in this business for years, do great, 2-week forecasts. And I asked him, I said, now that they're saying that's a record. He goes, yeah. I said, well, how about, do they have any information from 1982, 83? And he goes, come on, that stuff doesn't go back that far. I said, well, how far back does it go? He goes, that statistic might be a 10 to 15 year statistic. So I said, well, that's worthless, but yet it's all over the news. I said, that's a worthless statistic, because in 1983, we had 20 inches of rain in Fresno during the deal. Right now, we're about at 9. Here's another interesting deal. The all-time record was actually in 1969, was not quite 10 inches for the month of January. So if you look at it, that was probably caused by similar events. That was probably 12 atmospheric rivers in a row or something. But, since they don't keep statistics, that far back, I mean, that's a useless statistic on something that they're now saying, hey, it's this, That's just like El Nino or La Nina is supposed to be a dry year. But that doesn't really work because, again, that's a newer, phenomenon that they talk about. That only addresses warm water off the coast of Peru. So cold water, La Nina, warm water, El Nino. So there's other balancing factors in the atmosphere that can counteract that. But you don't hear that, out there. So anyway, I like factoids, so.
Thank you. Member Lewis, Vice Chair Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, last night at our council meeting, I had a little bit of bragging rights about the event that we attended yesterday at Frito-Lay PepsiCo. And I'm sure some of my colleagues wish they had signed up to be on the board. But I have this little funny thing staff shared with me that last year they gave away a lot of the chips and all. And for those who attended, they know, I had a pretty big purse with me yesterday and I stuffed it with as much as I could. But had I known, I would have brought my large tote beach bag with me because I'm a phenom in regards to potato chips. I'm an expert. I'm well versed on that since I was a child. So I did manage to snatch a few bags of barbecue potato chips, and when I took that, I filled in the front so it looked like nothing was missing, and took a couple of the bags to staff at City Hall. So I really enjoyed myself, and it was a great pleasure that for me to know that this organization had a hand in making that happen with the grants that were given to the company, and to meet some of the top officials there. Had an opportunity to talk to one of their executives who purchases all the land for their company throughout the United States. So it was a good event, and I appreciate the opportunity to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I guess I'll get the last word on this. I thought it was a extremely phenomenal event. Very rarely do you have so many people rowing in the same direction. The PepsiCo president said this is just the beginning of their conversion to zero and near zero, and commitments like that from private enterprise are difficult to come by because there has to be some utility for them. Also, potato chips are light, so it's probably easier with electric vehicles. In some cases, electric vehicles, electric semis don't work as well. And in their business model, it works really well, but they are committed to the health of the valley. And we keep talking about health, the benefits that come out of, the things that this board is doing are actually pretty phenomenal. And this reminds me, I always hate to overexpress on one event, but we had a school bus event with the city of Modesto, who was another committed partner. It was the same type of event where someone has decided, either the board or the administration or a combination of all, that the health of the kids is important to them, and they were first in line. And I still think that that's the largest school bus fleet. But I see now, Roberts Ferry was first in our county. I see, as we're signing checks and checking things, I see other small school systems buying electric buses now in Stanislaus County. So it's catching on, and all for the good of all of us. So appreciate that. All right, I don't see any other comments.
Let us know when Budweiser is doing a event. When they go electric, yeah.
That'd be a party.
I'll be there.
Uber in.
I don't need
Okay, we do have a closed session. I'm gonna turn it over to Annette.
Yes, item 13, closed session. We have two closed session items as indicated on the agenda. The district versus Agland joint venture, and then Central California Environmental Justice Network versus Leanne Randolph. And do we have any public comment on either of these items?
We do not have any public comment in Fresno or online. Do we have any public comment in Modesto?
No public comment in Modesto.
Thank you. Any public comment in Bakersfield?
No public comment in Bakersfield.
Thank you. Okay, and then so we will convene to closed session, which will be in the VTC room.
Are we expected to report out?
No, we do not expect to report out.
Okay, we're gonna recess to closed session.